Courage, it is I, do not be afraid. These words of Jesus in today's gospel, as he's there walking on the water, these words to Peter and to the apostles, these are words that speak to us, I think, in 2020. We have had many reasons to be afraid. We've had bushfires, we've had the pandemic, and then you've seen this explosion that happened in Lebanon just a few days ago. And that doesn't say something of the economic impact and other impacts that have happened throughout this year as well. This year has been a year so far where we've had every reason to be afraid. And our readings today name this time of mental anguish. This isn't unique for us. Mental anguish and this fear that sort of takes over everything, this has happened in the past. So Paul, writing to the Romans, was talking about this in the second reading today, about where the people were suffering and they'd sort of lost all hope. They'd lost their friends, many had been persecuted, many had been martyred. And so Paul writes to them in this context and says, keep your eyes on Jesus, because that's what will bring us hope in the midst of suffering. The first reading, we have Elijah. He's experiencing an earthquake, a fire, an absolute natural disaster that was raining down upon him. And he just stays put. Yes, I'm sure he was afraid, like many of us have been afraid as well, but he stayed there. And then after all of these disasters came a gentle breeze. And he knew that God was in the gentle breeze, and he was able to come out and live life to the full again. Where will we be perhaps in 6 months, 12 months, when these disasters have come to an end? Will we be people who live in fear? Or will we be people who've listened to the words of Jesus Christ and be people of courage? As Jesus says, courage, do not be afraid. This gospel today is one of the great miracles of Jesus. Jesus comes walking on the water in the middle of the evening. It must have particularly scared, I think, the apostles to see someone walking on the water towards them as the waves are coming by. And Jesus comes walking towards them, and then Peter has the courage, as Jesus says, to then step out and walk towards him. And Peter's walking towards Jesus, but then he takes his eyes off Jesus and he starts to notice the waves. He starts to notice the wind. And when he takes his focus off Jesus, he then starts to sink and he starts to drown. This can happen to all of us as well. What's happening in the world can almost force us to take our eyes off what we're really about, to take our eyes off looking towards Jesus. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and he starts to sink. He starts to drown. And this can happen to all of us. But what Peter does is really interesting. I think this is the example for us all. We should keep our eyes on Jesus, even in the midst of great destruction, even in the midst of great fear. Keep our eyes on Jesus. But if we become focused on a pandemic and we forget about Jesus for a period of time, or on a fire or an explosion, or the list goes on, once we start to drown, once we start to experience this mental anguish, we need to also do what Peter does. Peter realizes he's drowning. He looks back up towards Jesus and he says, Lord, save me. That's what we need to do as well. Reach out to Jesus and say, Lord, save me. Lift us, allow Jesus to lift us back up so we can walk on the waters with Jesus and Jesus can bring us to safety. In St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, there is a magnificent mosaic that was originally a painting, which is in the Vatican Museums. It's a painting by Giotto, a very famous Italian artist, I think from the 14th century. And this painting is just outside the doors of St. Peter's. When you walk out of the doors of St. Peter's, you see this mosaic. It's the first thing you see when you step out of St. Peter's Basilica. And it's this image of Peter sinking, with the boat there and Jesus walking on the water, and Jesus is there lifting Peter back up. And it's a reminder, I think, to all of us as we leave the church, is that when we go into the world, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus, because if we don't, we're going to drown. But if, like Peter, at times we take our eyes off what we're really about and we start to drown, let's have that humility to look back towards Jesus, to allow ourselves to be lifted up. Within our Catholic tradition, when we start to drown, one of the first things we should do is come to confession. We're still doing confessions at the moment, even with some distancing. We have a screen and so on, which has got special things in it, to almost like a face mask in the screen. I encourage you to come to confession. We all experience times where we're drowning and we're sinking, where we haven't kept our eyes on Jesus. Let's today acknowledge that. Let's refocus what we're about. We aren't people of the pandemic. We aren't people of fear. We are people of courage. Courage, my friends, do not be afraid.